Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm Jane Frudenberger. I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters, Bellingham, Whatcom County. The League is a nonpartisan organization whose purpose is to promote informed and active participation of citizens in government. This voter forum is hosted by our League and the City of Bellingham. The City has provided the facilities, and the forum is being televised live by BTV Comcast Channel 10. This broadcast will be repeated on this channel on low-powered radio stations, KMRE and KAVZ. Please check the city's website, cobb.org, for times. The Bellingham Herald is our media partner for these forums. We want to thank them, the city, and the radio stations for their generous support, and we hope you'll thank them too for giving voters an opportunity to learn about issues and the candidates. The forums are the property of the League of Women Voters in the City of Bellingham. Material from them cannot be used in any manner without specific written permission from both parties. This is the first of 4 forums we'll be presenting. The schedules of the other forums can be found on our website, lwvbellinghamwhatcom.org, or in hard copy in the lobby. Our forums are structured but also interactive. Each presenter will have an opening statement, and then we'll answer questions from the League. We will then solicit questions from the audience. Please write your questions on the index cards provided and pass them to an usher. And raise your hand if you need a card if you didn't get any when you came in the door. 1 question per card, please, and make them legible. We ask our audience to be respectful. No catcalls, no applause. We want as much possible time for the debate. And the last reminder, please turn off your cell phones. Today's forum is about the state ballot issues, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, League member Jill Bernstein. Jill.
Good morning, and thank you, Jane. It just occurred to me I forgot to turn off my cell phone, so I'll do that in just a second. A few words about the process that we're going to use today. The presenters who will be at the front of the room will each have 2 minutes for their opening statements. For all other questions and for their closing statements, the presenters will have 1 minute of response time. This morning we have Margaret Wall, who will be keeping track of our time, and John Wall, who will flash a yellow sign when there are 15 seconds left and a red sign to signal stop. If the presenter continues, a bell will be rung to signal stop talking. We ask that the presenters please be respectful of these constraints as we only have a limited amount of time. Please don't make us ring the bell. As to the order for the presentations with each of the issues that we're going to have today, the individual who is here to speak in favor of the issue will present the first opening statement and the first closing statement. However, the responses to the questions will be rotated between the presenters. Finally, we have asked for no audience reaction and no applause, except for right now. Will you please join me in welcoming our speakers? And for our first issue today, we were going to be having with us today Judge David Nichols, retired Judge David Nichols, who is going to be speaking in favor of Initiative 502, and Steve Sarich, who is going to be speaking against Initiative 502. Mr. Sarich is the manager and spokesman for the No on I-502 campaign and the executive director of the Cannabis Action Coalition. For the last 10 years, Mr. Sarich has been an outspoken activist supporting the rights of medical cannabis patients in Washington, and Judge David Nichols is a retired Superior Court judge here in Whatcom County and has been an advocate for the complete legalization of drugs for many years and has written op-eds whenever the opportunity has arisen. So thank you, Judge Nichols, and thank you, Mr. Sarich, and we're ready to begin today with Judge Nichols. If you would, please give us your 2-minute opening statement.
All right, thank you. Can you all hear me? All right? Okay. 20 years on the Whatcom County Superior Court bench has taught me a lot. I sat on literally hundreds of drug cases, and I can tell you after 20 years, I am so fed up with those cases, the way they gum up the courts, the way they cost us thousands of millions of dollars, new prisons, the necessity for new prosecutors, defenders, clerks. It puts the civil cases way, way in back because we have to give all criminal cases precedence. And I am here to simply state in bald terms that the sooner that we get rid of the war on drugs, the better. It is a pernicious injury to our society and to many societies worldwide, and it is accomplishing absolutely nothing. I urge you to think clearly about 502 as a necessary first step. Before I die, I hope that the country will eliminate the war on drugs just the way it eliminated prohibition back in the 30s. This is a ridiculous, harmful way to proceed to solve what is perceived to be a problem. There is no doubt that we have a drug problem in this country and worldwide. But the problem is that we have a drug policy that is far worse than the cure. As I say, this is a necessary first step to get this initiative passed, to get rid of a cure which is far, far worse than the disease.
Thank you. And Mr. Sarich.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Judge Nichols. And I have to say, I agree with everything he said. That said, before I get started, let me apologize in advance. I've had my blood tested in the morning, and what I find is that I wake up with 4 times the legal limit for impairment that's called for in I-502. So if I appear impaired in any way this morning, let me apologize in advance. I agree with Judge Nichols that we have to get rid of the war on drugs. I believe that marijuana should be legalized. Unfortunately, this law does not legalize marijuana. The only way you can legalize anything is to remove all the criminal penalties that currently make it illegal. And I-502 does not remove one single penalty from Washington state law. In fact, what it does do is it enacts a per se DUID law, which will ensnare every medical marijuana patient in the state of Washington. There's a zero tolerance level for people under 21, which means that every medical marijuana patient under 21 is going to have the choice to either stop medicating or stop driving, or they're going to have a much more serious crime on their hands of driving under the influence of drugs, which will be on their record for the rest of their lives when they aren't in fact impaired. Per se laws, per se drug laws, have nothing to do with impairment. There is no relationship between per se drug laws and impairment. This is simply another strategy in the war on drugs to find you guilty. We'll allow you to have an ounce of marijuana, but you better not have it in your system when we pull you over. And that's just unacceptable. If we're going to legalize marijuana in the state of Washington, let's legalize it. This does not do that.
Well, thank you. And if we could start with our questions then, and I'd like to remind the audience that if there are things that you'd like to know from our speakers, go ahead and make sure that your cards get passed to the ushers and brought forward here to the screeners so that each of our speakers has the opportunity to provide you with the information that you would like. So starting with Judge Nichols, if you would please, federal law makes marijuana possession illegal and sets penalties. If this initiative passes, how might that impact those who act legally in this state but illegally under federal law?
First of all, I sort of resent Steve's incurring sympathy right off the bat. There's no question. It's a dilemma. It's already happened in California, the passage of laws and then the federal government stampeding in, and the Unfortunately, the federal courts will always give federal law precedence, but that is not a good reason not to take the first step and try to pressure the federal government to back off. Let me just tell you quickly, at the border up here in Blaine, the DEA has already announced and in practice does not prosecute small amounts of marijuana and drugs at the border. Mercifully, they have prosecuting attorney Dave McCachran, who's willing to take even the most minute amount of drugs to trial. And I have strong objection to that. But the feds would like to get out of this business. I know they would.
And Mr. Sarich?
Well, first let me say that for all of you who've been taught that federal law trumps state law, that is not true when it comes to controlled substances. Title 21, Section 903 gives the power to the states to control controlled substances, which is why we can have medical marijuana laws in the state of Washington. If Washington state were actually to legalize marijuana in the state of Washington, we could stave off any kind of a federal preemption. But if we keep it illegal on the state books, the feds will have absolutely no problem taking us into court, and they will win. But before that happens, the 502 people wrote a poison pill into this law and from the very beginning. They said that there are several things that the Liquor Control Board must take into consideration when passing rules and regulations regarding the sale and distribution of marijuana. A, B, C, D, E. A, they must consider the conflict between federal law and state law in the state of Washington on marijuana. And the second they do that, they're going to finish their coffee, finish their Danish, and go home because it's illegal federally.
Those cards are really annoying.
And that bill.
Starting this time with Mr. Sarich, and what do you see as the impact of this initiative if it passes on state revenue and its impact on law enforcement costs?
Well, what the Office of Financial Management said was, I thought, very interesting. They said this law will either result in a possible $2 billion in tax money or zero. And they said zero because if the federal government comes in and stops it, there won't be any money. So let's not even talk about that. If these people had been serious about setting up a legalized system of growing and distribution and retailing, they would not have written the bill the way they wrote it. They would have just legalized it. So let's not even talk about the taxes because those aren't going to happen. What's going to happen is we're going to follow a new policy of per se DUI drugged driving, again, which has nothing to do with impairment, and you're going to see a tremendous spike in people pulled over and thrown in jail for a crime that they are, in fact, not committing.
And Judge Nichols?
It's a real dilemma for law enforcement. They love the fact that the federal government supports more officers and vehicles and all like that. Just look at the increase in the number of border people that we have, from about 35 a few years ago to 350, and all those vehicles and planes and everything. So there's a vested interest in keeping the money flowing out to the war on drugs. On the other hand, a lot of well-meaning law enforcement people would like to get out of the drug business and really try to keep our streets safer and handle the really serious crimes with more people. As you know, a lot of the crimes have been shoved to the back burner in favor of working on the drug problem. So my own personal belief and feeling is that most law enforcement would prefer to get out of this business and divert the money somewhere else where it can do more good.
Question from our audience, starting with Judge Nichols, is should medical marijuana users, or we'll say anybody who is using marijuana, be driving?
Well, that same question could be asked of anybody who consumes alcohol. Clearly, if you've had too much to drink, you shouldn't drive. And if you have too much marijuana, you shouldn't be driving. I would hope that if this passes, the state will establish standards that are measurable. But, I mean, to say per se, if you've had one tote, you shouldn't drive, I think that's extreme. But obviously, we're not talking about the commission of a crime here when we're talking about legalization. People who commit crimes, who drive with their alcohol level above the legal limit, need to be arrested and stopped, and the same would be true of drug use as well. But I think the same pattern should be followed as long as it's not too much and is proven not to affect driving. It shouldn't, the prohibition shouldn't be there.
Mr. Sarich?
Well, according to the most recent studies, two recent studies by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, one thing is perfectly clear. There is absolutely no relationship between THC in your blood and impairment. You cannot, it's unlike alcohol. Alcohol is the only thing where you can establish a per se limit. Every single study has said that, and what they're doing here is they're setting a 5 nanogram per milliliter limit and a zero tolerance limit for anyone under 21. The Washington State Patrol has already requested $2 million in training money to train drug recognition experts for the highway patrol. So when they pull you over, they won't arrest you for your ounce of marijuana. When they pull you over, they're going to take you, they're going to impound your car, they're going to take you to the hospital, they're going to take your blood, and if you've got 5 nanograms or more in your system, you're going to jail for DUID, and you will have no defense in court whatsoever, even though you aren't impaired.
Under this law, it would still be illegal for those under 21 to use, possess, or sell marijuana. And Mr. Sarich, what is your view of this provision in the initiative?
Well, first of all, they made no accommodation. Again, any limit is not right. I'm often asked, well, what is the correct limit? And what all of the research shows is you can't have a limit. So, but having a per se limit of 0 has got nothing to do with keeping our highways safe. It's simply a way to throw more people in jail.
So, Judge Nichols, the question this time is, under the law, it would still be illegal for those under 21 to use, possess, or sell marijuana. Do you have a view on that provision in the statute?
Yeah, I think it's stupid. I think it's really stupid. I mean,
Not fair that we agree
whom are
all the
we
time.
kidding? Kids have as much access to this stuff as adults do. And it's a sop to people who worry about minors. And I understand that. We know that alcohol is limited to people 21 and older. And then we go on the college campuses and on a Friday or Saturday night, and we know that every single freshman on the campus has been drinking too much. So it's eyewash, it's dressing in order to appease people who are concerned about minors. But they are going to find this stuff and they are going to use it. And therefore, education, health education and other kinds of education are what are really needed, not absolute bans. Bans don't work on personal taste. People ignore them if they don't approve of them.
So this question, starting with Judge Nichols, from the audience, what effect would Initiative 502 have on the agricultural production of hemp fiber?
Well, I think it would be like every other crop. I certainly don't know for sure. Maybe Steve has better information on that. I think it will depend on the market. You'll grow hemp if you can sell it at a reasonable price that will cover your costs and make you a profit. It's like any other production factor. If the market gets flooded with the product, the price will go down and people will get out of the business and they'll grow something that really makes them money, like poppies.
And Mr. Sarich, do you have any thoughts on the effect that Initiative 502 would have on the agricultural production of hemp fiber?
Absolutely. I just have to apologize that both of us are up here agreeing with each other on everything. Look, they're not going to, it will not legalize the growing of hemp. First of all, they would have to legalize marijuana in the state of Washington because they're both cannabis. Second of all, they set the THC level so low in this law at 0.3%. If you look at hemp, just do a little studying on hemp. Hemp is generally 1 to 3% THC. You still couldn't smoke it and get high. You'd get nothing but a headache. But they set the THC level so low that you can't grow hemp at 0.3% or below. So they didn't actually plan on having growers growing hemp in the state of Washington.
A question from the audience. Is there a definitive test available to detect impairment from marijuana? If not, the questioner asks, why not err on the side of caution?
Is that for me?
Yes, we'll start with you, Mr. Sarich, please.
No, there is no test by blood content. Again, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. Matter of fact, the person at the National Institute of Drug Abuse is the former head of the NIDA, and he was also the first drug czar under President Nixon. Not exactly a marijuana fan. He initiated the war on drugs, and he says that it is impossible to come up with an impairment number based on blood content of THC. Impossible. And so erring on the side, why don't we err on the side of not arresting people who aren't impaired?
Judge Nichols, any comments on this question?
Not really, because I don't know. I tend not to be as fearful of law enforcement here as Steve is. I don't think that law enforcement is going to waste its time trying to find people impaired on marijuana unless there's other kinds of driving activity that really catches their attention. It's not going to be a casual thing. There's no point in it. That law enforcement doesn't want to waste its time. It must take 2 or 3 hours to bring a drunk driver in and process him or her. I just don't think they're going to. I think it's a fear without a real cause.
And starting this question with Judge Nichols, medical marijuana is legal in Washington under certain circumstances. How would medical marijuana patients be affected if this initiative passes?
I would leave that to Steve because his research is really obviously deeper than mine on this. My sense is that it really wouldn't matter, except it would give them more legitimacy. And but I don't think it'd be an issue then. I mean, if it's a controlled substance that you can buy legally, I don't know what the problem is. The doctors can prescribe it in whatever strength they think it's helpful. And you know, that the situation in California is really, really disturbing. You know, after they passed the medical marijuana, the feds descended on all these so-called clinics and grow operations and so forth and attempted to shut them all down. So I won't say that won't happen in this state if we go forward, but I would hope not.
And Mr. Sarich?
Per se DUID laws, let me explain to you where they're coming from. That was a policy, it's a new strategy for the war on drugs developed by our drug czar, Gil Kurlikowski, who was good friends with Allison Holcomb, good friends with John McKay when he was a federal prosecutor, when Kurlikowski was a police chief. If you go to the ONDCP website, here's their strategy on per se drug driving. They're planning on doing this in every single state because, yes, you'll be able to have marijuana now. They know they're not going to be able to stop that train. So their new strategy is to throw you in jail for DUID.
But as to medical marijuana?
Every medical marijuana patient in the state of Washington, every time they get behind the wheel, will be guilty of DUID. It's just which day when they pick you up and go, I smell pot. They added something very interesting that maybe Judge Nichols is not familiar with. They added something to this law. Everybody from the yes side has been saying, well, you'll still need probable cause, not under I-502. Section 31.8 adds a new provision in there, and what that does is it says that a law enforcement officer's written statement that you looked impaired is now prima facie evidence for probable cause. He just needs to say you looked stoned at the time, and he can go take your blood.
Thank you. And at this point, we have 1 minute for closing statements, and Judge Nichols will start with you.
502, no doubt, is not a perfect law. I would urge you in every case to look for the money. See where the vested interests in this war on drugs are. The Gil Kurlikowskis of this world may mean well, but nobody wants to see his entire division eliminated. Anyone who is making money off of this war on drugs is not going to be happy with any sort of inroads into the war, which is ultimately going to fail and be killed. So I would urge you to vote for 502. Not a perfect law, perhaps, but a very necessary first step.
Mr. Sarich?
This is not a first step. I agree with Judge Nichols. We need to end this war on drugs, and we need to end it properly and legally without further criminalizing more citizens of the state of Washington or any other state. This law is all about the new strategy in the war on drugs. I agree with him. Let's legalize it. Let's stop this insanity. This law will not do it. Again, it does not legalize marijuana. It does not remove one single criminal penalty from the state law regarding marijuana and just adds new ones that are going to criminalize thousands of people in the state of Washington. The Office of Financial Management made the Department of Licensing made an estimate that they would be taking in $4 million in additional funds based on this DUID. If you don't think they're going to use it, that's their plan. $4 million in new fines under these per se DUID laws. We need to legalize. This is absolutely not the bill to do it with.
Well, thank you very much to both of our speakers. That was very useful information, and we thank you for your participation here today.
Thanks for having us.
Our next topic is going to be initiative. Thank you so very much. And we next are going to hear from speakers on Initiative 1185. And speaking in favor of the initiative is State Senator Doug Erickson, and speaking against the initiative is Andrew Villanueva. So as we get started, you should know that Doug Erickson is the state senator for the 42nd District. As Mr. Erickson explained to me, he has run the bill in Olympia many times and believes strongly in its passage. And thank you so very much. And Andrew Villanueva is with us today, and he is the founder and executive director of the Northwest Progressive Institute. So that you know, Initiative Measure 1185 concerns tax and fee increases imposed by state government. This measure would restate existing statutory requirements that legislative actions raising taxes must be approved by 2/3 legislative majorities or receive voter approval, and that new or increased fees require majority legislative approval. And good morning to our speakers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Senator Erickson, perhaps you would begin for us and give us a 2-minute opening statement about your position.
You betcha. Thank you so much to the League for hosting this forum today. And I have to say how ironic it is that the 2 marijuana guys wear ties and the 2 tax guys don't. Kind of a little changing of the way we talk about things. Anyway, to get right to the topic, today I'm here in support of a 2/3 majority in the legislature to be able to raise the taxes on the people of Washington State. For the past, many years, I've been serving Whatcom County legislature, and what I've been focused in on is private sector job creation. And this summer, as everybody's been talking about jobs, I've been out visiting business leaders in Whatcom County, people that create jobs, large and small job creators, and asking them what they're really looking for from the legislature to be able to have the confidence to go out and create more jobs in Washington State. And what they're asking for are basically 2 things. One is stability in the taxing system in Washington State, and the other item they're looking for is regulatory relief, so we can reduce the amount of regulatory burden to be able to go out and create new jobs in Washington. Now, the 2/3 requirement would give job creators, small business owners and large business owners, the ability to have greater certainty in the taxing arena in Washington State so they can make long-term investments here. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so important. The other reason I think it is so important is because requiring a 2/3 vote in the legislature to raise taxes obviously makes it much more difficult. Raising taxes becomes the last resort, not the first option. And when raising taxes is the last resort, it forces the legislature to come together and be focused in on how we can reform state government to make it more cost effective, how we can change the mindset in Olympia from the method by which we provide a service to the cost and the quality of the service that we provide to the constituents of the people of Washington State. Raising taxes is easy when you don't have a 2/3 requirement. It happens every year. Reforming government is incredibly difficult. And that's why you need this law, to force legislators to not go for the easy option, which is picking a tax here, picking a tax there, a targeted tax on beer, a targeted tax on cigarettes, some other way to put off the pain of having to make changes to the system. That's why I hope the people of Washington State will again support the 2/3 requirement to raise taxes and force the legislature to focus in on reform. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. Sorry for making you ring the bell.
And is it Mr. Villanueva?
Villeneuve, but close.
Okay, thank you so much. And
You're welcome.
you're speaking today against the initiative. Would you be so kind as to give us your opening statement, please?
Sure, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thanks to the League for inviting us. I'm Andrew Villeneuve. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Progressive Institute, a 10-year activist in politics, and I'm here to speak against Initiative 1185. No doubt some of you are familiar with this issue because you've seen it on the ballot before in 2007 and 2010 when Initiatives 960 and 1053 were on the ballot. This is a very similar measure. In fact, I would say it's almost a carbon copy of Initiative 1053 with a few differences. And the primary problem with it is that it takes away majority rule in our legislature. Our founders gave us a representative government, a government where majority rule prevails. We have a system of majority rule with minority rights. Minority rights are protected by the Constitution, and under all other normal circumstances, majority rule is supposed to apply. And I've come up with a little pictogram, which I've given to the moderator. Hopefully, you'll be able to get a chance to look at that. But what the pictogram shows is that in normal circumstances, 50 votes in the House and 25 votes in the Senate are sufficient to pass legislation. This initiative would take that away, take away majority rule, and instead allow 17 senators and 33 representatives to block legislation that raises revenue that they don't like. Now, that is not how our government is supposed to work. Majority rule is always what has been at the cornerstone of American and Washington democracy. It's about allowing the people through their elected representatives to make laws. We have to accept the will of the majority in order for things to get done. Otherwise, we have gridlock. And this initiative does not allow us to proceed with fixing our state's problems in a reasonable fashion. That is why we're urging people to vote no. We ask you to consider not just the impact of changing the state's rules, the state's plan of government, but also what effect it has when only a minority can sign off on raising taxes. Thank you.
Starting with Senator Erickson, if this initiative is passed, how will it affect the state of Washington's ability to meet its constitutional responsibility to fully fund education?
Yeah, this initiative has absolutely no impact on the state's paramount duty to fund education, which we should be doing right now. You know, it's ridiculous that we're spending state tax dollars in other areas that some people consider to be a higher priority than funding K-12 education. So this initiative will have zero impact on the ability of the state of Washington to fund education. For the people who are against it to say somehow this will do that, it's just patently untrue. Next year, for example, we anticipate an 8 to 10% increase in the amount of tax dollars coming into the state of Washington from the people of Washington. If you want to fund education, take that full growth in tax revenue and dedicate it to K-12 and find other places in the state government that you wish to make reductions in. It's as simple as that. If there's a will in Olympia to fund education, we could get it done. Unfortunately, for the past 10 years, there hasn't been a will in Olympia to make education funding a priority.
And Mr. Villanueva?
I would say it's not that simple. I mean, delivering state services is a complex issue for two reasons. Because we'd all like to get as much service as possible for as little money as possible. If we could pay no taxes and get all the services, we'd love to do that. The reality is services cost money. And here's the thing that proponents of this initiative won't admit. Every year, we collect more tax dollars because of population growth, inflation, and new development. So every year, the number of tax collections is always going to go up because that's just the pace of the economy. Even when the economy is sort of at stable equilibrium, we still have inflation oftentimes and population growth. So what we're seeing then is we're not seeing really a growth in state government. We're just seeing it keep up with the economy. And we are not keeping up with our responsibilities, as the Supreme Court pointed out in the McCleary decision, to fund basic education. We've been slip-sliding downhill for far too long, and this initiative will choke our representative government's ability to fix the problem because it gives power to the minority, not the majority.
Thank you. Starting then with Mr. Villanueva, If the initiative passes, how will it affect the state's bond rating and therefore its ability to obtain federal matching funds for infrastructure improvements such as highways be affected?
Well, I'd say that State Treasurer McIntyre has done a pretty good job managing our state's finances despite some pretty difficult times. But you know, our state is not going to be in a good financial position if the two-thirds rule remains in effect. Why is that? Because again, our government will lack the wherewithal to effectively solve its problems. It's so easy for 17 senators and 33 representatives to just say no. So if we can't raise revenue to fund the services that the people want and demand, then we're in a lot of trouble. We're not going to be able to fix our schools. We're not going to be able to fund road repairs. We're not going to be able to do the things we need to do because we're not going to be able to have the money. We are not going to be able to pay for everything that we want. Our universities, they're almost without state support at this point. Our state parks, it was just announced that, you know what, we are not going to give this, the state's not going to give them any money anymore. Discover past revenue is pretty much all there is. And that may not be enough to keep all of the parks open. So we have to decide, what state do we want to live in?
Senator Erickson?
What was the question? One more time. I didn't quite catch his answer there.
The question was, how will the state's bond rating and therefore its ability to obtain federal matching funds for infrastructure improvements such as highways be affected if the initiative passes?
I mean, it won't be impacted. The two-thirds requirement will not impact the ability for the Washington state to go out and float bonds. The argument being made by the con side, I believe, is saying that if it requires legislative approval of two-thirds to be able to raise tolls on the 520 bridge, for example, that impact the ability for us to go out and get money to bond on this particular area. And it won't impact it. I have a fundamental disagreement with Treasurer McIntyre, former Representative McIntyre, on this particular issue also. And as the ranking Republican on the House Transportation Committee when we did the nickel package and also current member of the Transportation Committee, I understand the process for this. So I think it's a political red herring that some people are trying to throw out that this particular initiative will impact our ability to float bonds. What impacts our bond rating is too much debt. And Washington State is pushing up against our debt ceiling, and we are incurring too much debt, which will have an impact on our ability to go out into the bond market in the future.
With this question, starting with Senator Erickson, what other states, if any, require a two-thirds majority to raise taxes, and what is the effect in those states of requiring the supermajority?
Shoot, you know, I was at my computer this morning, I had a good handout I could have printed up on that particular aspect of it. What you found, I think, if I can go to my recollection, I can send people this if they'd like to see it later, direct them to a web page where they could find the actual chart, is that states that have a two-thirds requirement to raise taxes or a supermajority requirement to raise taxes were not as significantly impacted by the economic downturn as states that did not have the requirement. Because what you tended to find in those states that had a supermajority requirement to raise taxes tended to run a more fiscally tight shop in their particular state governments. So if you just go and look at what past performance is of states that had this type of policy in place, they performed much better than states that did not have this policy in place during the most recent economic downturn.
And against the initiative?
I would say that you didn't hear any direct evidence there for how well the states with the supermajority requirement have done. I'd say there's a lot of factors that determine how well a state does economically. We have done pretty well despite having some really tough challenges, but we are by no means guaranteed to have a sound future. We have to determine whether we're going to have that. If you look at California, which has had the two-thirds requirement for both budgets and raising taxes, meaning they have to come to two-thirds both to raise revenue and to agree on a budget until very recently when they got rid of the budget one. It's been a disaster. I've talked to a friend in Sacramento who used to cover state politics for decades at the Sacramento Bee. He said gridlock became a nightmare in Sacramento. The state lost opportunities to get back on track in good times when it could have put money into public services. It wasn't saving money for rainy day because the minority in state government who was against raising taxes stopped them from doing what was fiscally necessary to protect the state. So it's been a problem in other states.
And starting this time with Mr. Villeneuve, under 1185, a two-thirds legislative majority would be required to pass tax increases, but only a simple majority to pass the hundreds of tax exemptions or reductions for specific classes of Washington taxpayers currently on the books. Please comment on the effect of this apparent disparity on any effort to reduce what are commonly called loopholes.
Sure, thanks. I think it's ridiculously unfair that you could create a tax loophole or a tax break for a company or an industry with only a regular majority, but then it takes 2/3 to get rid of any tax loopholes. If you think about it, when you take away a tax loophole, you're not really raising taxes, you're recovering revenue for the state that it otherwise would have. So you have to do a frame shift to think about it differently. Look at the contributors to this initiative and ask yourself if they're looking out for your best interest. BP put in $100,000 for this initiative. ConocoPhillips, $110,000. Shell, $100,000. Does anyone here think these oil companies are looking out for your interest? What about the beer and wine distributors, the American Beverage Association, also hundreds of thousands of dollars? These associations, these corporate trade lobbies are not looking out for the public interest. Their goal is to protect their tax breaks. It's a lot easier to get 17 senators and 33 representatives to block repeal of a tax break than it is to try and work on 50 representatives and 25 senators.
Senator Erickson?
Yeah, well, I have a little problem with your question. Using loaded words like tax loopholes and those types of things, I think, is not the best way to facilitate discourse. And so I do have a little bit of a question with how that particular one was phrased. The question I have for the people watching on TV is what is a loophole? Well, what the opponent of the initiative has just laid out is basically the fundamental belief that all dollars belong to the government and they allow you to keep a portion of it as they see fit. And I would question why anyone would think that you're working in the best interest of the citizens of Washington State after you disparage the job creators in my district and job creators all throughout Washington State by somehow trying to demagogue and taint their desire to have a good Washington State that they can invest in. So I have difficulty with that particular aspect of it also. But the key function that you're talking about is, when does a tax incentive become the rate tax code, the base that we're taking from a particular company? If you want to have a sunset date on a different tax rate for a specific company, that's fine. Do that. But at some point, when you go out and say this is the incentive, this is the tax code, that becomes the tax rate. So that is different than saying you're simply creating a loophole. And as I like to point out, one person's loophole is another person's family wage job that keeps them employed in Whatcom County and putting food on the table and paying taxes into our community.
And this question will begin then with Senator Erickson. From the audience, shouldn't we have a 2/3 majority requirement for the voters to pass this initiative if we're going to have a 2/3 majority requirement for the legislature?
Some people like that idea up there in the audience. That's not our constitution in Washington State to say, why not have a 2/3 requirement to elect legislators? Why not have a 2/3 requirement for everything? What we're saying in this one is there's a fundamental difference between taking the wealth of one individual and giving it to another person, whether for a great cause or whether for a cause that some people think is not so great. But you are fundamentally taking that money away. So the question that the people of Washington State will have under our current Constitution is the question of, shall a greater majority be required to take the wealth of one person and give it to another? That's really the fundamental question that's being asked. Our Constitution allows for it. It says a majority must vote for it in the legislature. A majority could be 50% plus one, or a majority could be 2/3. That's what our Constitution says, and that's what the people of Washington State will have the opportunity to vote on this November.
Sir?
I would say the Constitution, by majority, it just says majority. It doesn't say that 2/3 is a majority. And we have a dispute, the proponents and the opponents of this initiative do, over what majority means. The opponents say majority just means 50% or greater than 50%. It doesn't mean anything else. If it means something higher, you don't have to stop at 2/3. You can go to 75%, 90%, 100%. Majority can mean all of those things. Now, does that make sense to anyone here? I would say, from my opinion, it does not. So we think that the 2/3 requirement is not only unconstitutional but undemocratic. And it just doesn't make sense in representative government that some people would have the power to block the will of the majority and to be able to prevail over important decisions without having basically to follow the rules. The Constitution was written for us. It has worked for decades and decades. It's time we respect the rules and go back to majority rule.
And starting with you again, how does this initiative differ from Initiative 1053, which was approved by the voters 2 years ago and is now before the state Supreme Court on grounds that a supermajority conflicts with the state's constitutional requirement of a majority vote for passage of most legislation. So I guess the question is, how does this initiative differ from Initiative 1053?
Well, it doesn't really differ. If you look at the text of the measure, it's very, very similar, and it would basically continue the two-thirds scheme, which has been very problematic for our state. You know, we heard earlier some words about job creation. We heard about the importance of having a strong economy. There's been some research done by the Washington Budget and Policy Center, and they found that since the summer of 2009, about 18,000 jobs, teachers, child protection agents, parole officers, healthcare workers, have been directly eliminated due to state budget cuts. Now, some of those cuts might have been averted if we could find some revenue to offset them, but we weren't able to because of the two-thirds scheme. It prevents a majority from finding solutions to our problems in a balanced way. And so we've been losing jobs. Now, when people lose jobs in government, they have to go basically on the same unemployment situation that people in the private sector are on already. So losing jobs does not help our state economy get better. It does not help our state's companies do better. It does not help us advance as a state.
And Senator Erickson?
Yeah, but first off, on this issue about state job losses, the majority of the state job losses came from the liquor initiative and the privatization of the state liquor stores. So when you start throwing stats out, you got to be careful where you're pulling them from. The other part, when it comes to other reductions in state government, there was massive growth in state government that really led to some of the problems that we face. A lot of those layoffs were attrition, people that retired and weren't replaced. And so I think you'd be very difficult, I'm not sure you said 18,000, to go out and find 18,000 individuals who were laid off in Washington state government. That'd be a very difficult task to do. When you get to the two, I will agree with the gentleman with me today on one issue. I think a 90% threshold to raise taxes or any law would be ridiculous. That shouldn't happen, or 100%. But I think the people of Washington state have the ability to make the determination is if a two-thirds requirement is in the best interest of being able to move Washington state forward. It doesn't prohibit tax increases, and just last year you saw a tax increase passed on Washington state's banks, by the state legislature, a two-thirds vote to raise taxes on the banking industry. Was it a good idea? I don't know. I voted against it, but it got two-thirds, and those taxes were raised in Washington state. So it does happen, and taxes can be raised. And I didn't get to your underlying question, the fundamental differences, but it fundamentally deals slightly differently with fees.
The bell
Sorry.
is wrong.
I know, bell is wrong.
For each of you, and starting with Senator Erickson, who are the principal financial supporters for your position on Initiative 1185, and why do you believe they support or oppose this initiative?
I haven't checked the PDC reports on this particular initiative, but I do know who supports it. Who supported it 2 years ago, 64% of the people of Washington state. And while some groups try to demagogue against corporations, they're evil these days apparently when they create jobs. When people try to demagogue against Tim Eyman, say it's the Tim Eyman initiative, so vote against it, scary Tim, oh, he's evil. One person and one company does not vote for an initiative to get it passed. It's the people of Washington state that have the ability to do so. And in Washington state, different interest groups will participate in different ways in the initiative process to attempt to achieve goals. I see nothing wrong with that. But the final arbiter, the final decision maker, is not the company or the individual that writes a check to support this initiative. The final decision maker are the people of Washington state. And that's what it should be. And those individuals have the ability to contribute or not contribute to campaigns. They have the ability to contribute or not contribute to initiatives, to vote yes or no on this particular initiative. So I think that's kind of a negative, counterproductive argument to demagogue against certain individuals or companies that support or are opposed to particular initiatives.
Sir?
I think it's important for people to know who's trying to influence them. It's not necessarily a matter of demagoguing one particular group or interest or another. It's a matter of just knowing who's trying to influence you. And I can tell you that the Beer Institute gave $400,000 to support this measure. The oil companies combined gave about the same amount, and there's 4 of them. So those are the primary sponsors or financial interests behind this initiative. And when you look at the total financial contributions to the initiative, about 90% of it just comes from 9 to 10 corporations and corporate trade groups. So that's not really a grassroots effort. And the opposition so far is very broad-based. Most of the money has been given simply by labor organizations, but if you look at the broad-based opposition to the measure, it includes not only labor but also environmental and civic organizations. A lot of different people and interests who are very diverse say that we need to keep majority rule in Washington state, and that's why we need to say no to Initiative 1185.
Well, thank you both so very much. And now we have a minute for a closing statement, starting with Senator Erickson.
Well, thank you so much for the chance to come out today. I think what's become clear during the course of this conversation, both today and statewide, as people talk about the two-thirds, it is about the fundamental question of, do you want greater control of taxation in Washington State? Do you want the state of government to be looking for ways to reform our system and improve it, focus on cost and quality of services that we provide? Do you want to make it more difficult for your legislature to raise taxes on the companies that create jobs, so small businesses and large businesses? Do you want to make it easier for the state of Washington to raise taxes on soda pop, on beer, on your visits to the grocery store? Or should raising taxes be a last resort? I think the majority of the people of Washington State believe that raising taxes in the legislature should be a last resort after you tried every other alternative. There is a fundamental difference of opinion between those in favor and those opposed, I believe. Most people in favor believe that the wealth belongs to the people, and we allow the government to take a portion. The people that are against it, my opponent today, seems to think that the wealth belongs to the government, and when willing, they will let the individual or the company keep a portion of it when they see fit.
Mr. Villanueva.
I get pretty tired of hearing that people who are for majority rule are trying to keep all of the wealth in the hands of the government. The reality is we are the government. We are a democracy, and we decide how to govern ourselves. We have a state legislature that is accountable to us. We can fire all of the people of the House of the Representatives every 2 years, and we can fire half the Senate every 2 years. So we, through our representatives, we make laws that we think are in our best interest, and if we don't like the laws that get made, we can vote all the people out if we want. That's how representative democracy works. We also have the initiative process in Washington State, and the initiative process allows the people to make laws directly, but no law made by the people or by the state legislature can run afoul of our state constitution. And our state constitution, our plan of government, says bills, all bills, pass by majority vote. And majority vote means 50% or greater, no more, no less. The Supreme Court is going to decide a lawsuit against Initiative 1053 in the coming months, but we should vote 1185 down so that we can protect majority rule.
Well, thank you both so very much. That was very informative, and we appreciate you today. Thank you so very much. And next, we're going to be having our speakers on Referendum 74. And today, Referendum 74, you should know that the legislature passed and gross substitute Senate Bill 6239 concerning marriage for same-sex couples, modified domestic partnership law, and religious freedom, and voters have filed a sufficient referendum petition on this bill. This bill would allow same-sex couples to marry, preserve domestic partnerships only for seniors, and preserve the right of clergy or religious organizations to refuse to perform, recognize, or accommodate any marriage ceremony. Speaking in support of the bill today is, the referendum rather, is State Representative Christine Litton of the 40th Legislative District, who voted in support of marriage equality this past legislative session. Speaking against the referendum is Chip White. Mr. White is the Communications Director for Preserve Marriage Washington, the campaign urging voters to reject Referendum 74. And good morning to both of our speakers. Starting with Representative Litton, you have 2 minutes to make an opening statement.
Thank you. Thanks to the League of Women Voters and for the Bellingham Herald for hosting this event. You know, who you marry is perhaps the most important decision you'll make in your life. And surely one of the things that everyone in this room can agree with is what marriage is. Marriage is a lifetime commitment, that special vow that two people take in front of their family and friends. Marriage means love and commitment, caring for one another in sickness and in health. It means supporting and taking responsibility for each other. My parents had their first date at the high school sweetheart dance when they were both 16. And they have a bronze plaque on the side of their door that recognizes that vow they took. And it says, established the Aldersons at December 26, 1954. They marked the beginning of their lives together with the date that they were married, not the sweetheart dance. And I'm married to the love of my life, Mike, and we have 2 wonderful children together. And as a mom, I hope that my children also find a person that they can love and someone to share their life with and perhaps have a family. During the last legislative session, I was moved to listen to so many testimonies of couples from around our state and how they, like my parents and Mike and I, are in a loving and committed relationship, and how they also want to marry to share that life together. This legislation was a very easy decision for me to make in the legislature. Please join me in supporting Referendum 74.
And Mr. White.
Good morning. Thank you for hosting this forum, and thank you for being here today. It's my pleasure to represent Preserve Marriage Washington. Preserve Marriage Washington is a broad-based, grassroots, statewide coalition of community groups and individuals who believe in protecting the traditional definition of marriage as the union between one man and one woman. Same-sex couples already enjoy full legal equality in Washington state. Referendum 74 is an attempt to redefine marriage and remove the interests of children from the purpose of our marriage laws. We believe that children deserve the best opportunity to be raised by both a married mother and father. Marriage is the only institution to encourage that result. Our opponents believe that marriage exists to satisfy the personal whims and desires of the 2 adults in the same-sex relationship, but really marriage exists for the benefit of society as a whole, especially children. Furthermore, when marriage is redefined, there are profound consequences, legal consequences, to anyone who disagrees with this new definition of marriage that would be imposed. Counselors, clergymen, parents, children, business people, all of them would suffer severe consequences if, for their personal moral beliefs, they believe in the traditional definition of marriage the way it has always been, one man and one woman. With nearly 250,000 Washingtonians signing the petition to get this referendum on the ballot, it's clear that the people of Washington want the chance to speak up for traditional marriage, just like 32 other states have done. Every time that this issue's been on the ballot, folks vote for traditional marriage.
Thank you both. Starting then with Representative Litton, 2 years ago, voters approved the so-called everything but marriage law, granting full civil rights to same-sex couples. What changes would result from approving this referendum?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So we're talking about the domestic partnership. So I have a very good friend of mine, 2 children who have met the loves of their lives, and one was able to have a fantastic wedding last year, and one is in a domestic partnership. And what the heck does that mean? And when I think about my children and their opportunities, a domestic partnership, we're not really even sure what that means. The marriage of 2 people, of loving and committed people, really does set down, people understand what marriage is. When you're in a hospital and you're sick and you're in a domestic relationship, in a domestic partnership, you are not assured the same rights that you would have in a marriage. And the law, as it is written, says that that will happen, but in reality it does not. I'm out of time.
Well, I'm glad that question was asked, because same-sex couples in Washington already have all of the exact same legal rights and benefits as married couples in Washington. 3 years ago, the voters approved Referendum 71, the everything but marriage law. And that's what it meant, everything but marriage. All of those same legal rights, benefits, and responsibilities that married couples have, registered same-sex domestic partners have. Referendum 74 would not give any additional rights to same-sex couples. What Referendum 74 would do is redefine marriage for all of society. As for hospital visitation, same-sex couples already have the right to hospital visitation. If hospitals are not abiding by the law, they need to be educated and they need to abide by the law.
So as a follow-up question to the information you've just given to us, starting with Mr. White, what difference does the word marriage make?
Marriage has been universally recognized as the union between one man and one woman. The man brings something unique and special to the marriage relationship, and the woman brings something unique and special to the marriage relationship. Redefining marriage, well, there's a common myth that somehow same-sex marriage can coexist, can exist alongside of traditional marriage. That's simply not true. The truth is, when marriage is redefined to be genderless, to be a genderless institution, marriage is redefined for everyone in all of society, and anyone who disagrees with this new definition would be at odds with the law. Anyone with an ounce of common sense knows that a man is a husband, not that a man is a wife, and that a woman is a wife, not that a woman is a husband.
And Representative Litton?
You know, I guess I have to agree that I too believe in traditional marriage, but I believe in traditional marriage for everyone, and that's going to be the difference.
And, okay, starting with Representative Litton, do you believe that Referendum 74 adequately protects the right of religious communities to exercise their freedom of conscience in regard to their view of marriage? Why or why not?
Yeah, you know, Referendum 74 guarantees religious freedom. It won't change how each religious organization defines their marriage. It protects the rights of clergy and churches and religious organizations that don't perform same-sex marriages to have that right. And it also protects the growing list of denominations that choose to recognize marriage equality and marriage freedom.
Mr. White?
Pastors and priests already have the right to not perform same-sex ceremonies. So for the approved side to say that Referendum 74 would either give them that right or protect that right is intellectually dishonest. It's a political fig leaf. Pastors and priests, clergy people, already have that right. But the more important question is, what serious negative consequences would religious groups and individuals of faith face if marriage were redefined for all of society? Already, religious groups like Catholic Charities in Boston, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. have had to choose between fulfilling their social mission based on their religious beliefs or crumbling to this new definition of marriage. And, for example, they have been forced to close their charitable adoption agencies. If marriage is redefined, there will be serious consequences.
With this next question, starting with Mr. White, in your view, how would Referendum 74 impact children and families?
That's an excellent question. Children and families are protected by traditional marriage between one man and one woman. Redefining marriage would have a serious impact on children. When marriage is redefined to be a genderless institution, it says that a mom and a dad is not the ideal. A mom and a dad married, raising their children together, is not what we would aspire toward for our society. Instead, it says any two parents would do. It would say something akin to a mom can be a man and a dad can be a woman. And anyone with reasonable common sense knows that kids learn from both a male role model and a female role model. If marriage is redefined, the people who redefine it would teach it to kids as young as 6 and 7 years old.
And Representative Litton?
I think that we can all agree that the marriage law should do everything to protect children. And then we should also protect children regardless of how they came to their families. And every mainstream child welfare organization in our country, including the American Academy on Pediatrics, the Washington Academy for Family Physicians, backs this initiative because we know that each child in our system, in our school system, many of you know I'm very, very involved in our schools, will not be jeopardized by this. And these groups that really look out for the welfare of children coming out have taken a position on it because we know that marriage strengthens families, and we should do everything that we can in our society to strengthen all families and all children.
And starting with Representative Litton, other than the effect on children and families, do you see this measure, if passed, having an impact on other aspects of the lives of individuals in Washington?
If I want to talk about kids a little bit and the relationships that I have with a lot of different families, very diverse families from across our state. And like I just said, what we see is that having a strong family is so important to children and bringing them up in our society. My children are in their early 20s, and they accept this very, very readily. It's my generation and the older generation that really have struggled with this whole prospect. And I was actually with the Governor Gregoire, when she made her announcement that she was going to support this for the state, and really looking at, how important it was for our state. And, the bottom line of what we've all tried to teach our children growing up is that discrimination is wrong and diversity is okay. And, that's what I want my children and the next generation to know of what I supported.
Mr. White?
Would you please repeat the question, because I'm not sure that the answer matched the question.
Other than the effect on children and families, do you see this measure having an impact on other aspects of people's lives here in Washington?
Yes. Other than the effect on children and families, this measure will have a significant, serious impact on others here in Washington. I mentioned earlier about religious groups who would be forced to abandon their social mission or else give in to this new definition of marriage. In addition to that, local small businesses would be impacted. For example, wedding professionals. If it is someone's livelihood to be a wedding planner or a florist or a wedding cake baker or decorator, then they would not have a right to opt out. Marriage would be redefined for all of society, and people who believe in marriage between a man and a woman would be treated as bigots, would be treated as racists. The strong arm of the government would impose this new genderless definition of marriage on everyone.
This question comes from our audience, and it's one that is, I'm going to read as it was written for us, and we'll start with Mr. White. The audience member writes, the speakers apparently disagree about the scope of legal rights afforded by existing civil union and domestic partnership laws and those provided by Referendum 74. Please provide specific information about the provisions of Referendum 74 beyond current civil union and domestic partnership provisions.
That is an excellent question. Already, all registered same-sex domestic partners in Washington have all of the exact same legal rights and benefits and obligations as married couples. Approving Referendum 74 will not add a single new right or benefit for same-sex couples. Rejecting R-74 does not treat same-sex couples unfairly. Washington state law, as approved by the voters 3 years ago, when the voters approved Referendum 71, the Everything But Marriage referendum, Washington state law already provides to same-sex couples every single one of the legal benefits that married couples have. No additional rights or benefits would be provided because same-sex couples already have all of the legal rights and benefits.
And Representative Litton?
Yeah, thank you. So that may be true that the domestic partnership registry is supposed to give the same rights and benefits to marriage and what was intended by the law, but that's not what we're seeing. And what other states with domestic registries have found, including New Jersey and Vermont, is that these registries simply do not offer the same rights and the same responsibilities as marriage. And getting back to the previous question, so we have a current law, the anti-discrimination law in the state of Washington since the 1940s. We amended it in the state of Washington into law 6 years ago to include not discriminating against anyone because of sexual discrimination. Orientation, sorry.
And then this time, starting with Representative Litton, if passed, what would be the impact on senior citizen couples, regardless of gender, now covered under the current domestic partnership law?
I do not know.
Mr. White?
We are not asking for this to be passed. We are not asking for marriage to be redefined. We believe in traditional marriage the way that societies around the world have recognized it for thousands of years. A man and a woman coming together for that unique, special union that's called marriage.
And a question from the audience is separate but equal didn't work or was found to be unconstitutional for African Americans. Do you think it will work for gay and lesbian couples? And starting with Mr. White.
This is not a civil rights issue. Same-sex couples in Washington state already have all of the exact same legal rights and benefits as married couples in Washington state. Washingtonians have been very progressive on this. This is not a civil rights issue. Instead, what this is preserving the definition of marriage the way it has been understood by people groups around the world for thousands of years. And that is that marriage is one man and one woman. If marriage were redefined in Washington, those whose civil rights would be at stake are those who believe in traditional marriage, those who would disagree with the new genderless definition of marriage. Business people and people of faith, it's their rights that would be at stake. They're the ones who would face serious negative consequences.
And as I've said earlier, as a mom, I hope that my boys are treated fairly and that they have the same opportunity that I've had and that my parents have had and many people throughout our country to be able to marry. So as I get back to the same, the first few words that I've said is discrimination is wrong. We should all be able to treat fairly and have the same rights. And I hope that we can do that.
And a question which reflects on what Mr. White said earlier, is there anything in this a referendum which would require private businesses or private organizations to honor same-sex marriages? Representative Litton?
Yeah, and as I talked a little bit earlier, how we do business in America is we do not discriminate, and we have anti-discrimination laws. People, if you open a business, you open your business to all. And the experiences in two states that have already passed this, New York and Massachusetts, and other states that are actually looking at this issue with freedom to marry, we're going to see tens of millions of dollars of new businesses in our country and in Washington state related to weddings, business, tourism, and everything else. But again, there have not been a stampede of lawsuits in those states from businesses, and I don't see that anything more than this will be an economic gain for our state.
Mr. White?
to somehow suggest that this is the windfall, this is the cure to what ails our economy, to redefine the definition of marriage the way it has always been understood, well, that's simply a red herring. And the question is, will businesses face serious negative consequences if marriage is redefined? And the answer is yes. When Chick-fil-A restaurant CEO Dan Cathy expressed support for traditional marriage, his business experienced severe national attacks by same-sex marriage activists and by the press. Furthermore, mayors of Chicago, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. attacked the business, jumping on the business for believing in traditional marriage, and in some cases forbid that business from locating in their cities. For example, Mayor of Washington, D.C., Vincent Gray said, "I have historically been a supporter of gay rights, and I will continue to be so. People who don't support human rights for everybody, there is just no place for them in our nation's capital."
And starting with Mr. White, if gay individuals and lesbians are going to have children, whether the referendum passes or not, isn't it important to give these parents the tools to protect their children in the same manner as as straight people do?
I have no doubt that parents love their children. Preserve Marriage Washington is urging a reject vote on this referendum because the ideal situation for children to be reared is by their married mother and father. Now, it's true that far too often death and divorce happen, and we don't reach that ideal. But the ideal is for kids to have both a married mom and a dad, and for the kids to be the outgrowth of that special, unique relationship.
And Representative Litton.
So I have to tell you, the friends of mine who are in relationship, domestic partnerships, and who are raising children are doing a fabulous job. And I wish every single child that came through our doors of public education had as good a parents as what they are. I would be more than happy to have my boys raised by any of my friends that are in same-sex relationships because they are fabulous parents. So to even intimidate that they would not be good parents, you need to walk through the doors of our public education systems and see how children are being raised. I want children raised in families that are going to love them and are committed to them, and regardless of their sexual orientation.
Thank you. And we're going to take a moment now for a closing statement, starting with Representative Litton.
So I spoke earlier about my wonderful parents and being raised in a family that was absolutely phenomenal. And realizing, coming from them the way I was raised, of realizing how important marriage is, how important it's been to our families, and recognizing their commitment to each other on the door of their house. And as my parents are getting in their twilight years, last time I was home visiting, they actually wanted to talk about when they leave this earthly world as we know it. And they want on their tombstone 2 rings with their marriage date on their tombstone. And I thought that was, it bothered me at first, but it really reinforced how I feel about this whole situation and the way that I was raised, and that all living and committed couples should have the same opportunities that my parents have had and that I've had, and we should not discriminate. And I have been so happy in my relationship. Every single person should be able to have that same thing. So please join me in support of this referendum.
And Mr. White?
The question is posed, what is at stake with the outcome of Referendum 74 this autumn? Well, first, it's that there are 2 conflicting and irreconcilable definitions of marriage, but only one of those will be the definition of marriage for Washington State. The traditional definition of marriage, the way it's always been, is that it's a man and a woman who comprise the union called marriage. If that's redefined, traditional marriage will not exist alongside of this new genderless definition, but it will be replaced by this new genderless definition. The referendum preserves Washington's historic definition of marriage, the way that voters in every state have voted when they have had the opportunity to cast their ballots. 32 states have voted on this question, and in every state where the voters had a chance, they voted to reject redefining marriage.
Thank you both so very much for your participation today. We so appreciate it, and it was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, our speakers are going to be on Initiative 1240, which deals with public charter schools. And speaking for the initiative is Lisa McFarland. And speaking against it, we're shifting seats there, is Christine Litton. Ms. McFarland serves as the Washington State Director of Democrats for Education Reform. She co-founded the League of Education Voters and LEV Foundation, and she sponsored 2 statewide education funding ballot initiatives. She has helped lead the Simple Majority campaign and has worked tirelessly on Seattle's last 9 school levy campaigns. She has received a number of awards for her work on behalf of public education, including the Seattle King County Municipal League's Citizen of the Year in 2008, the Washington State PTA's Friend of Children Award in 2007, and the Washington Education Association's Friend of Public Education in 2002. State Representative Christine Litton is Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. Chris has been a lifelong advocate for children and education, having served on the Anacortes School Board, 2 as board president, local PTA president, on the executive board of the Anacortes Schools Foundation, the executive board of the Anacortes Senior College, and a key activist for the League of Education Voters. She currently has appointment to the Joint Task Force on Education Funding, Quality Education Council, and Joint Task Force of Education Accountability. Good morning to both of you. And starting with Ms. McFarland, would you like to take 2 minutes and tell us about your support for Initiative 1240?
Thank you. Charter schools are public schools that are independently managed and run by qualified nonprofit organizations. Just like in traditional public schools, in public charter schools, the teachers have to be certified and the money follows the student. But what's different in public charter schools is that principals and teachers have more flexibility around curriculum, staffing, length of school day, length of school year, so that they can better meet the needs of students and customize the learning environments. Initiative 1240 brings the best of what is working nationally in 41 states to Washington State. It prioritizes oversight and accountability, and it capitalizes on the research that says that the states with the strongest charter school laws are getting the best results, particularly for at-risk kids in urban areas. We all know that traditional public schools work great for some kids, but not for all kids. Each year, 14,000 students drop out of our traditional public schools, and we must do a better job of giving struggling kids options. Initiative 1240 prioritizes serving at-risk kids, and these charter schools have cracked the code. They've cracked the code and taken kids that are years behind, kept them in school, graduated them from high school, and are sending them to college. Parents of struggling students deserve the option, and that's all this is, to send their kids to a public charter school. It's an option that is available in 41 other states. We are the only state in the country with an urban corridor that does not allow public charter schools. And the reason that public charter schools are enormously popular with parents is that they are working. Please join me in voting yes on Initiative 1240.
Thank you. And Representative Litton.
Yeah, I'm Christine Litton, and I'm the state representative for the 40th Legislative District. And like I said, I've dedicated my entire life, adult life, to be an advocate for kids and for education. When my two boys entered the public education system, I became very involved with their education and what I believe needed to be what needed to happen in schools. And when I was elected to the Anacortes School Board, I made a shift in focus from my two children to the 3,000 children in my school district and making sure they would be successful. And I feel like I take the role of a legislator very seriously in my role of making sure that all 1 million children in our state have an opportunity of a great education. And our Washington public schools have been built around the notion of opportunity, and that's opportunity for all children, that every single child in our state will have a great public education. And I stand before you today in opposition to charter schools, and I'll tell you why. And I'll put it very simply, they cost money and they don't work. We know what works in education. We must find proven solutions for real problems in our school system so our children can succeed. Across our country, charter schools are proving to be an experiment that don't work. And we know what works. We know that early learning works. We know that full-day kindergarten works, early intervention, small class size, and making sure that we have a quality teacher in front of every child in our system. Washington voters have rejected this notion of charter schools 3 times over the last 15 years. We must ensure that every single child in our state has the opportunity of a great public education, and I hope we reject charter schools for the 4th time.
Starting with Ms. McFarland, what would be the impact on existing public school funding if public charter schools are established?
They are public schools, so they don't impact public school funding. It would be like if if a district next to you opens an alternative school within the public school system. So this is an option within the public school system. And the funding levels in the state, which I think Representative Chris Litton and I would agree are not sufficient, they don't impact public school funding. What they do is they provide an option to better serve the kids. And I would agree with her that we need to serve all kids well. When we lose 14,000 kids a year and they're dropping out, what the public charter schools are doing is providing another option within the public school system. So the public money stays in the public domain.
Representative Litton?
Right, so I have about 60 schools in my legislative district that I'm out in on a regular basis. I've been in almost half of them. And what I can tell you as a legislator, when we're making decisions, this will have an impact on our funding in our state. We will have to make decisions on what we're going to fund. If this passes, there will be a cost. The superintendents that I talk to in my districts that I'm visiting also realize that there will be an impact. We will have to make decisions and priorities on what we're going to fund in our state. That's what we've been doing over the last 3 years. We've cut billions out of our education funding to date. That will be a decision that we will have to make. I am going to prioritize funding of education. I'm going to prioritize full-day kindergarten. I'm going to prioritize early learning. I'm going to prioritize those things that we know that work. Charter schools are not working, and I'm sure we'll get into the statistics later, and I'd be glad to share that with you.
And as a follow-up, if this measure passes, what do you see as the impact on maintaining and improving the physical facilities of our existing schools? Representative Litton?
If this passes, there will be a cost for the initial startup of this. And there will be a cost. Our superintendents actually know what they need to do. We have a lot of innovation schools across our state. We have a lot of things that are currently working. When I look at how this initiative is set up, it is true, we are failing many, many children in our state. We are failing them, and this initiative does not solve this. If this set up 40 public charter schools that were going to target those children and not be based on a school with whoever is in that school deciding what we call a parent trigger that they want to go to a charter school, I would be all for it. But this is not going to be about all children. It's going to be about those schools that have really strong parent advocates for their children. There are going to be children that are lost in this system and is not going to serve the people that Lisa and I would really like to have served.
Ms. McFarland?
These schools are free and they're open to all students, and there is a very clear statutory prioritization for at-risk students. On the cost issue, I would point out that there is an enormous cost to kids and their families and society when they drop out of high school. $10,000 a year for the rest of that child's life, per student, the cost of dropping out. Charter schools, we both want to prioritize things that work. Charter schools work. It's the reason why President Barack Obama supports them. It's the reason why Governor Mitt Romney supports them. It's the reason why mayors and governors across this country are trying to add more charter schools. They absolutely do work, particularly for at-risk kids. The facility issue is a place where charter schools have traditionally been shortchanged, and they're usually in not fancy facilities. There is federal money for startup on the facility costs that we are now not getting, and we lost money on Race for the Top because of that. Thank you.
And this is a good follow-up question that comes to us from the audience, which reads, currently we do have alternative schools locally, like Options and Windward High Schools for students who might not fit into our more traditional high schools. What advantage would charter schools provide over the schools that we currently have in our community? And I think this time starting with Ms. McFarland.
Absolutely. We do have innovation and option schools. Some of them are serving at-risk kids. Many of them are not. What charter schools do is provide another option within the public school system. As many option schools and alternative schools we have, we are still losing kids. One size does not fit all, and particularly in urban areas with at-risk kids and kids of color, they are not getting what they need out of either the traditional public school or if they can get into one of the alternative schools. So, and I think that question presumes that same thing that's going on with public charter schools, which is that the money follows the student. It's just another option within the public school system. Nobody's assigned to a charter school. Parents are choosing them, and they're enormously popular. Thank you.
Representative Litton?
So if you're lucky to be one of those children of a parent who chooses to go with a charter school that will, flip the, like we say, a parent trigger to go with a charter organization, that's great. But we are creating a system of the haves and the have-nots with this. If it was targeting our children that were failing, if it was targeting our children that had an opportunity gap, that would be a different story. But if you're, we talk about the lottery system, if you're one of those lucky children that your parent choose to initiate your being acceptance in a charter school, that's a lottery system. And I'm not willing to take that risk of more funding going to something that doesn't work, number one, and that sets up a system of inequality across our state. That is one of the things as a school board member that I made really sure of, is that it wasn't about my children. It was about the 2,000, the 3,000, and the 1 million children in my state. What am I going to do to help all of those children? And I do not believe that this initiative is set up to do that. And I think Ms. McFarland and I would love to do more for kids. And this is just an issue we don't agree on.
Each of you have spoken briefly about the experience in other states, and this time I'm going to ask that you speak specifically about the experience in other states and how that reflects well or poorly on this initiative, starting with Representative Litton.
Yeah, the only long-term longitudinal study that's been done on this was a study on the effectiveness of charter schools. It was actually done by Stanford University, and I guess I am a data and research-driven type person when I make decisions. A lot of these decisions we make are emotional, but when it comes to priorities, I have to prioritize what's going to work for most of the kids or opportunity for all kids across our state. And the results that Stanford University, and it's hard to dispute, are not good. They're not not encouraging. Literally half of those charter schools that are currently existing, they are on the same level, they are performing the same as our current public education system. About 37% did worse, and about 17% did better. If I were a business owner, I'm not real sure I would take a risk and only a 17% chance of success. Some that work, great, but I am not willing to take the risk. I think Washington is better than this, and I think we stay the course on the work that Lisa and I have worked on in 2009 and 10.
And Ms. McFarland.
So there are like 200 studies on charter schools, and Representative Litton is quoting selectively from one, and if you actually finish reading that study from Stanford University, you will see that they made two important points that the opposition conveniently forgets to say, which is that the states with the strongest charter school laws are getting the best results. Nobody says that they're a panacea, and clearly, and Stanford and Harvard and MIT have proved beyond a reasonable doubt, the research jury is in urban areas with low-income kids and minority kids, they are the public charter schools are outperforming the traditional public schools. These schools have cracked the code. They've changed the trajectory of kids' lives, and that's what we need to do, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
And this time, starting with Ms. McFarland, what impact would public charter schools have on the ability of Washington schools to compete for federal funds under programs like Race to the Top?
Well, right now we lose out on federal funding for public charter schools because we are one of 9 states that bans charter schools. The administration that we have in D.C. now is strongly supportive of public charter schools. Barack Obama was on the board of a charter school. So there is money for startup, for facilities. Race for the Top, we had a horrible showing. We got 32nd out of 36. One of the reasons, not the only reason, one of the reasons was that we don't allow charter schools. We also have a growing achievement gap, and that's the issue that gets me excited about public charter schools. Having gone and seen some of these schools, having actually carefully looked at the research, it is very clear that this is an option that our struggling kids deserve to have.
And with regard
Representative
to, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Excuse me.
Yeah, with regard to the funding, you know what? Our schools aren't failing us. We're failing our schools. And I think what we learned and what we found out from the Supreme Court just back in January 5th or 10th, with the McCleary decision, is that we right here in Washington State, we have set up a model of what's going to work in our school and how we fund basic education and what will work. The components of the bills that we packed and Ms. McFarland and I worked on in 09 and 10, 2261 and 2776, set up a model of great schools in our state. We just have not funded those in the legislature. You heard a little bit earlier about that, the discussion around the 2/3 initiative, and we know what we need to do. We have set up a model of success for every single student in our state, and we have set up a model for local schools to make decisions for their children and their community to be successful. We need to fund that now. We are not funding education, so it's even hard to look at what we're doing in our state or whether it's successful or not because we don't pay for it.
And this time, starting with Representative Litton, if the initiative passes, what effect would it have on local control in the school districts?
So local control is something I'm very familiar with, coming from a school board in Anacortes, serving many, many years on that. And one of my main concerns with that kind of evolves around that, and that is the transparency and the accountability to the local community with this initiative. So as a school board member, I took my stewardship of this taxpayer money very seriously. When we flip to a public charter school, the charter school does not go through a publicly elected board. So there is no accountability back to the taxpayer. You know, if I asked everyone in this room to say, if you have children in the K-12 system, raise your hand, I bet you only a few of you would raise your hand. You lose your voice with this initiative because it takes away the local control and the local decision making. You don't go through a locally elected board. You don't go through a superintendent. They are independent. The only thing public about this is public taxpayer money.
Ms. McFarland?
So, we're entitled to our own opinions, but we're not entitled to our own facts here. This initiative actually elevates local control, I would argue. The epitome of local control is parents being able to choose where to send their kid, particularly if the traditional system is not working. There is strong oversight and accountability. By definitions, these schools have a performance contract. There's annual reviews. And here's the thing, each school is authorized and overseen by either a locally elected school board. So you can and around the country, school boards have gotten in the business of chartering schools because they're realizing that the charter schools, the nonprofits running them, are doing a better job of serving their kids than they're able to do. Or there's a state commission. There's plenty of oversight and local control, plenty of oversight. Thank you.
And this one, starting with Ms. McFarland, what's different about this initiative than the last three that were rejected by voters on this subject?
There's actually quite a bit difference, and for the audience, I'll say that I was on the other side on the prior three measures and actually had a management role in running part of the first charter initiative. There's a ton difference, and one advantage of coming to the party 20 years late and after 41 other states is you get to learn from other states about what's working. So what's different about this initiative is the prioritization of serving at-risk kids. What's different is the oversight and accountability, and what's different is that this will be, and we've already been graded by the National Association that looks at this stuff, one of the strongest, if not the strongest, charter school laws in the country. And the research is showing the stronger the law, the better the results. So, and what's also different is 14,000 kids a year that we are still losing that are dropping out of high school.
And Representative Litton?
So I guess we disagree on this one too. So if this was about those children, those 14,000 children who are failing, they would be schools for them. There is no guarantee that they're going to be in these public charter schools. So many of us have volunteered in our schools. We know what it's like when a group of parents take over, whatever issue or whatever decision. And it is about being fiscally responsible, that stewardship back to the taxpayer money. There is no oversight. I don't see the transparency and the accountability in this. And this is not set up for those children that are failing. We need to spend our money and prioritize our money on what's working. This has been an experiment that is not working in our country. I've gone to conferences across our country too and speaking with other legislators. This is not working. If we're going to spend money, we need to spend money on things that are really working, like the full-day kindergarten, the early learning, those other things that we know have proven research behind it. Are we failing kids? Absolutely. This won't solve that.
And this question comes to us from the audience, and they're asking you to be very specific and say, how are charter schools working, or specifically, how are they not? So this one, starting with Representative Litton, please.
Well, I think we've all read tons of articles in the paper of how charter schools, when they're well run, I'm sure they are run very, very well. But for me, this is the whole oversight of a publicly elected board with taxpayer money. If we want to go with a private organization, if you want to go to a private school, do that. But we're talking about oversight of public taxpayer money, and you're not going to have that with this. I really want to set up a system of ours in our state and where every single child can be supported, and set up programs that have the wraparound services that help kids succeed. This isn't it. And if I thought this worked for kids, I would be the first one to sign on to this. I just do not see this working. And what bothers me most also is that it has divided the education community. We need to work on those things that are proven.
And Ms. McFarland.
So what's different, and I've actually had the privilege now of visiting a number of charter schools in a number of different states. When I travel, I just go look up a charter school. The principals and the teachers have flexibility, and they have the flexibility to do whatever it takes to meet the needs of their struggling kids. And nationally, charter schools are serving a higher percentage of kids of color than are the traditional public schools. So make no mistake about that. It's a no excuses culture. They frequently do early learning. They have longer school days. They have longer school years. It is, and again, whatever it takes, and they are providing the option for parents to have this for their kids. And it is, there's high-performing charter networks, there's high-performing individual charter schools. They're not all perfect. We're not saying this is a panacea, but we're saying there's some urgency that I feel, and that others and you all feel, about serving kids who are not making it today in our traditional public schools.
And a question from the audience is also, if this initiative passes, how can we be sure that the public charter schools won't permit or even encourage discrimination, either based on language or religious denomination? And Ms. McFarland?
Absolutely. The charter schools have to comply with all the civil rights and federal, state, and local statutes about that. Again, their track record is that they are aggressively seeking, and they are serving the kids who most need the help. And so English language learners, special ed kids, African American, Hispanic kids are served at enormous numbers by the charter schools. And it's an important, I just go back to the fact that this is an option. Nobody's assigned to a charter school. And it is, and parents are speaking with their feet. And they're wanting more charter schools, and it's the reason why mayors and governors around the country are adding charter schools. We added 500 of them last year because they are working. That's why we're adding them. Thank you.
Representative Litton.
Again, it's a lottery, so if you're the lucky child that is in that school where you have strong parent advocates that petition to be a charter school, that's great. So our low poverty schools are schools that have a lot of ELL or English language learners. They'll be in a lottery of hoping that they would get in. So it perhaps would set up an unintended consequence of discrimination, because it's going to be the strong parent advocates, the parents that are involved in the schools that are going to do this. If you're a child who has a struggling family, your parents in jail, or you have a single parent family, or you are homeless. We have a lot of homeless children in our schools. This is not going to be for you, because you're not going to be in a school that has gone to a public charter. I do not see this as serving all children, and that's what I'm all about.
Thank you both so much. And now to take a minute each for a closing comment, starting with Ms. McFarland.
Thank you. Charter schools, again, are public schools, and they're independently managed, and they're run by qualified nonprofits. The flexibility that is given to the principals and the teachers to extend the school day, the school year, do different staffing and curriculum is what is making a difference for these kids. The advantage of coming so late to the party is that you literally can learn from the mistakes of other states and successes of other states and bring the best of what works in public charter schools, and that's what this initiative does. Our public schools work great for some kids, but one size does not fit all, and I think we all agree with that. And one way you start serving all kids is you start serving the kids who are not being well served today and need options. And it is time for parents of struggling students in this state to have the option of public charter schools that is available in 41 other states. 41 other states have public charter schools. Please join me in voting yes on Initiative 1240.
Representative Litton.
Yeah, and I actually have to thank Lisa McFarland, because actually we find more common ground than not. So this is an interesting situation for both of us to be in, because we've worked together in the past. So the education leaders across our state have taken a position of opposition to this initiative. Washington PTA opposes it. The Your organization, League of Women Voters of Washington, opposes it. The NAACP of Oregon and Washington oppose it. The Washington State Superintendents oppose it. The Washington State Principals Association opposes it. The Washington State School Administrators oppose it. The Washington Education Association oppose it. And the Washington State School Directors, the organization I belong to, oppose it. And I think we really need to look at what our educational leaders are saying across our state, that this is not a good option for our kids. This is not about opportunity for all kids in our state to have a great education, and I hope that we reject it again. Thank you.
Thank you to each of these speakers also for a very... And thank you, because this does conclude today's forum. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham, Whatcom County, and our partners, the City of Bellingham and the Bellingham Herald, we'd like to thank each of the presenters who appeared here today. We also extend a thank you to BTV 10 and KMRE and KAVZ Low Power Radio for airing this forum. Repeats will be available on the television station's website and on each of the radio stations between now and Election Day. Check the City of Bellingham's website at cob.org for the times that the television show will be rebroadcast, and the websites for each of the radio stations will contain the times that they will be airing the audio from today's forum. Remember that these forums are the property of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham, and they cannot be used in any manner without specific written permission. A thank you also to the Forum Committee for your hard work, and to you, the audience, for being such an attentive audience and asking such great questions. For comprehensive information about what is on your ballot, please visit vote411.org. It will not only identify exactly what is on your ballot, but will also give the arguments for and against the ballot issues, and will have candidate responses to the questions that you want to know. For information regarding the Washington State League of Women Voters' positions on these issues, you can visit our website at lwvwa.org. That's lwvwa.org. We encourage you to get involved and to join the League of Women Voters. And remember, most importantly, to vote on or before November 6th, and to encourage your friends, family, and neighbors to vote also.
I belong to a lot of organizations, but the League I really like because they promote civil discussion.
They're not knee-jerk decisions. It's big picture thinking in the League. Actually having conversations about issues where they don't necessarily agree.
I think my vote, personally, my individual vote is worth far less than the impact that I have on others who come to me and we discuss the issues and really engage in a meaningful fashion.
They broaden their perspective so that they're able to see more eye to eye and come to agreement on points of values.
I can impact so many more people. I can impact the community. And I think it's a chance for young people to see themselves as part of their generation as a community who's going to be defining the world that they're going to be living in.
The results of elections are what determines what goes on in our country, in our state, in our local government. It's the only way we have to really voice what it is we want from our government.